Merry Christmas, my fellow freaks and weirdos. I'm Tom and welcome to Monster Gab, where we love to talk about classic and vintage horror. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about ghost stories for Christmas. This consists of a series of short British movies made especially for television and broadcast annually throughout the 1970s. The series was known as A Ghost Story for Christmas. Each of these films was shown late night on Christmas Eve on the BBC. None of the stories actually have anything to do with Christmas within their contents, and so as a result you can literally watch them any time of the year if you wanted to. They're mostly adaptations based on short ghost stories written by M.R. James. There's an old British tradition of telling ghost stories on a cold, dark Christmas Eve. People would share eerie tales with a group of friends or family, sat around a roaring fire and drinking warmed mulled wine, or something like that. M.R. James wrote stories to share with his friends on said occasion, and his stories have been published in a series of collections many times over. I actually reviewed a collection myself a while back. If you would like to see that video, I will leave a link in the description below. The series of films that ran throughout the 1970s is indeed called A Ghost Story for Christmas. Though you may have noticed that the DVD box set I have here, which is also available on Blu-ray, is actually titled Ghost Stories for Christmas. This is due to the additional contents within, which I will get to later. I mostly want to focus on the short films for this video. The first film is Whistle and I'll Come to You from 1968. This is based on one of my favourite short stories by M.R. James, and it's actually titled Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You My Lad. Professor Parkin stays in a hotel on the east coast of England. During his visit, he walks along the sand dunes where he discovers an old whistle with the inscription, "Who is this who is coming?" After taking it back to the hotel, he blows into the whistle and unleashes a force of paranormal nature. This is the only film in the collection that's in black and white, and it's technically not part of the Ghost Story series. It was actually part of another series called Omnibus, but was apparently the inspiration for the series A Ghost Story for Christmas. As a result, it is often now considered the opening feature for the series. This film has its fans, and I thought it was okay. Though I wasn't keen on the main character, as I found him to be far too eccentric, which I thought was distracting. I also don't feel like it's aged particularly well. It plays out like a drama more than anything else, with a few spooky elements, but it's still worth checking out. The Stalls of Barchester, 1971. This is the first official instalment. It's heavily implied to the audience that in the late 1800s, the former and elderly Archdeacon of Barchester Cathedral was murdered by a cleric, Mr. Haynes. Haynes takes on the role of Archdeacon only to be stalked by a hooded figure and a black cat, both creatures who appear to be carvings on the choir stalls of the cathedral. This episode is fine, with some good acting from Robert Hardy and Clive Swift. Not much really happens though, apart from a couple of eerie situations where Mr. Haynes spends the night alone in his manor. Bumps in the night, that sort of thing. But there's a story to be told here, and it's told well enough. A Warning to the Curious, 1972. Paxton, an amateur archaeologist, visits a town on the coast of Norfolk in search of a lost crown, which has been guarded by the Ager family for generations. Successful in his discovery, Paxton unearths the crown, but by doing so also unleashes a ghostly guardian. This one's a bit slow to begin with, but builds up to a half-decent ending, which is more energetic and fierce. Some good moments, but it could have used more, I think. Lost Hearts, 1973. This is another one of my favourite stories by M.R. James, and the film does not disappoint. Stephen Elliott, a young orphan, has been sent to live with his much older cousin, Mr. Abney, an eccentric alchemist with an obsession for immortality. During his stay, Stephen is haunted by the ghosts of 2 children. But are these entities trying to torment Stephen or warn him with a message of far more malicious ongoings? This is one of the better films in the collection, in my opinion. It's spooky in parts, and the ghosts are kind of creepy too. It's pretty faithful to the original source material, though some liberties have been taken. The story is essentially the same, and the characters are as described. It's a decent adaptation. The Treasure of Abbot Thomas, 1974. Reverend Somerton and his protege, Peter Lord Dattering, research the history of an old monastery and learn of some hidden gold, once the possession of Abbot Thomas, a disgrace to the church and an alchemist who was supposedly carried off by the devil, so legend would have it. The Reverend and his protege attempt to solve the mystery and follow clues in order to find the treasure, which is said to be protected by a guardian. The plot sounds very similar to the story A Warning to the Curious, and in some ways it is. As in, there is a hidden treasure and it is guarded by some form of spirit or entity. The original story by M.R. James is a fascinating read, and the adaptation here is presented well enough, but it feels more like a mystery rather than a ghost story. As a result, it fails to be spooky and not very scary. It does build to an ending, but I found the ending to be a bit underwhelming. Not my favourite, but the acting was pretty good. Michael Bryant played a fine role. The Ash Tree, 1975. In the year 1735, Sir Richard inherits the family estate from his uncle, who recently deceased had no children of his own. A pattern started by his uncle, Sir Matthew, who also died without any offspring. Sir Richard plans to marry his fiancée and have children, but he is haunted by the ghosts of his family past, who were once involved in a trial of witchcraft, and the cries of babies can be heard from the ash tree outside of the window of his bedchamber. I love a good slow burner, but this one was far too slow even for me. The story is fine enough, but I didn't think it was executed all that well here. It does have an interesting ending. It's disturbing, with some good use of practical effects too, if not dated a little bit. But yeah, that ending is something else. Still worth checking out. The Signalman, 1976. This is actually a Charles Dickens story, and in my opinion, it's the best film in the collection. A traveller notices a signalman stood alone on the side of a railway line, but when he offers a friendly greeting, it becomes clear that the signalman is frightened of something. Once assuring he's not to be feared, the traveller is invited to sit in the signal box by the warmth of a fire with a hot drink. It is here the signalman shares his story of a ghostly apparition he has witnessed standing by the entrance of the railway tunnel. Whenever this phantom appears, its presence is a warning for a tragedy about to happen. This film is incredibly atmospheric, with the feeling of both warm and cold elements. The warmth comes from the coziness of the signal box, the fire, the hot beverages, the small lonely space that's protecting the characters from the cold outside, where it's dark, foggy and chilly. The way the story is told is so captivating, and the events that take place really are tragic, with a lot of emphasis on that too. The ghost is a ghoulish looking spectre with no eyes and an expression on its face of both fear and pain. I thought it looked genuinely frightening. I like the characters too and the way they bond. They develop this kind of odd friendship which is surrounded by this morbid situation. Honestly, it's a brilliant watch, a ghost story told just right. Stigma, 1977. This is an original story and the first one to be based in the year it was filmed rather than a periodic one. A family of 3 move to a cottage in the countryside where upon their land is an ancient stone circle. They hire workmen to remove the stones, but when they do, a curse is released, causing the lady of the house to bleed uncontrollably without any wounds or cuts. This one's okay, it's well directed, and it has its own atmosphere. There's not much of a story, just a plot, and it just happens, but it's interesting enough, I guess. I don't have much to add to that, really. The Ice House, 1978. Once again, an original story based in the year it was filmed, and the last one of the original series. After leaving his wife, Paul moves into a residential spa, which is run by a very strange brother and sister. But all is not well as people begin to disappear, and Paul starts suffering from what is described as the cools. These occurrences seem to be related to an odd-looking flower that is growing by an old ice house. Besides a couple of eerie scenes, this is barely even a ghost story. In fact, there is nothing spooky or scary about it. It is an experimental film, and it relies on its atmosphere, which is only created by the odd mannerisms of the characters. Otherwise, nothing really happens, and I found it to be rather tedious. Some people do like it, I did not. Hey horror fans, this video is sponsored by Zealous Rebellious Clothing, who believe in encouraging self-confidence, self-expression, and the pursuit of passions without compromise. Based in North Wales, they use their passion for classic cars, music, film, and societal non-conformity to inspire their designs, with hoodies, t-shirts, hats, and much more, using only quality materials and prints. Be different, be rebellious. Zealous Rebellious Clothing. Check out their website, Facebook page, and other socials, links in the description below. In the mid-2000s, there was an attempt to revive the series A Ghost Story for Christmas, but rather than each year, the films were released sporadically, around Christmas time of course. 3 of those films are in this collection. A View from a Hill, 2005. Dr. Fanshawe, a historian, visits the house of Squire Richards to catalogue his collection. Amongst it is an old pair of binoculars, which he borrows. Looking through the binoculars, he sees an old abbey in a field which no longer stands and can only be seen through the binoculars. Fanshawe starts to feel like he's being watched and is soon stalked by a shadowy figure in a skull mask. Once again, this is an adaptation of a short story by M.R. James. I have said this a couple of times before, but I believe that some things just work better in text than they do on screen, and this is a fine example of that. The story is good, but I don't think it plays out well as a film. By all means, it's not bad, but I just think the book is so much better, and I believe that will always be the case with this particular story. I also think the adaptation here lacked atmosphere. But the acting is good, as are the characters. I just feel like it could have used a bit more tension, perhaps. Number 13, 2006. A man on business of academic research stays in the hotel of a small English town, where the townsfolk are known for dwelling on superstition. He stays in room 12 and notices the following room is 14, as it appears there is no room 13. He is soon stalked by a shadowy phantom and is disrupted by sounds coming from the room next door. When he goes to investigate, he is startled to find the suspicious appearance of room 13. Further investigation leads to a dreadful outcome. I liked this one. I genuinely enjoyed it. I thought the set designs and the locations looked brilliant and authentic. Once again, this is an M.R. James story, and I felt like I was transported back in time. But despite the occurrences that take place, and yes, it is a ghost story, it plays out more like a mystery film and lacks the chills that you would expect from a ghost story. A lot of it is down to how the film is directed and put together. For instance, the opening credits has the wrong choice of music in my opinion. It's just far too jolly. As this takes place, we see this authentic looking town, but the scenes are bright and happy. There are some dark scenes within the film, but not enough to distract you from the whimsy of feeling like you're watching a daytime BBC drama. The acting is admirable and I was entertained regardless of my criticisms. I just didn't find it scary, I guess. I'd still recommend checking it out though, it is a good watch. In 2010 there was another adaptation with the title Whistle and I'll Come to You. Compared to the 1968 film, the synopsis is pretty much the same, only the 2010 version takes many liberties, making alterations from the original source material. One being the whistle found on the beach, which is now a ring, and the period being based in the current year it was made instead of the Victorian age it was originally written. Some people don't like these alterations. Some people don't like the film. I loved it. The film has been given a more modern approach, which was a very bold move. I don't just mean the modern setting of the film, but how it's directed and produced. This 52-minute short film has the quality of a cinematic movie. I would have thought that this would appeal to a much wider audience, or even a younger audience who might perhaps find the 1968 version to be a bit dated. John Hurt plays the lead role and he is magnificent. You cannot help but appreciate his character. Seriously, I loved him in this film. The atmosphere throughout is morbidly somber. Some scenes are haunting, other scenes are tense, especially the ending, which is pretty frightening. If it wasn't for The Signalman, this would be my favourite. It's a damn good watch. But wait, there is more content within this collection. In the year 2000, a mini-series consisting of 4 episodes was released called Ghost Stories for Christmas with Christopher Lee. For some reason, only 3 of them are here, but I would assume that this is why the box set has its name. These are short episodes where Christopher Lee narrates the stories of M.R. James. You might think that this is just some guy sat in a chair telling ghost stories to the audience. And essentially, yes it is, but it's a bit more than that. First of all, it's not just some guy, it's Christopher Lee. Have some goddamn respect. Secondly, it's played out and acted with some nice directing. As in, Mr. Lee is telling his tales to a group of students on a cold winter's night. They're huddled around a fire drinking port or sherry, dressed appropriately in a periodic looking set. It's wonderfully put together and great to hear Christopher Lee recite these incredible ghost stories. And finally, there are a handful of episodes from 2 other series. Classic Ghost Stories from 1986 presented by Robert Powell and Spine Chillers from 1980 presented by Michael Bryant. Now, these episodes are just some guy sat in a chair telling ghost stories to an audience, I guess, but I really enjoyed them. They are actually told really well, with lots of character and enthusiasm. Some people might find these to be boring. It depends on how strong your attention span is, I guess, but I found them to be quite fascinating. Right then, my final verdict on Ghost Stories for Christmas. Overall, and as a whole, I would say it's quite slow.
Really slow.
These are stories rather than movies. It's less about scares and menacing ghostly reveals, and more about things going bump in the night, a bit of curtain twitching, and something lurking in the background. I would also say they've not aged particularly well. There are some old films here, and they do look a bit dated, especially the earlier films. They're actually quite grainy. And no, that's nothing to do with me owning the DVD collection. If I owned the Blu-ray collection, all of that grain will still be there, only in stunning high definition. These films have been digitally remastered or restored and cleaned, but only so much can be done, I guess. Regardless, that does not make them unwatchable by any means. These films have quite the fan base, and I've no doubt a lot of people have nostalgia for them too. But I do wonder how much younger audiences will appreciate them. The big question is, do I recommend it? Yes, 100% I absolutely recommend it. I'll admit, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but within that bag are some real goodies. For me personally, the three films Lost Hearts, The Signalman, and 2010's Whistle and I'll Come to You are worth the collection alone. And though there are a couple of films that I didn't particularly like, that's only my opinion, and I know for a fact that others regard them highly. You might like them. And then there's the additional content featuring marvellous storytelling. Perhaps not for everyone, but I happen to really enjoy this, and I know others will too. Despite my criticisms, the pros outweigh the cons, I think. And at the end of the day, it all depends on what entertains you and what you're looking for. I'm sure many of you will enjoy this collection. So guys, what do you think? Have you seen any of the films within this collection? Or do you own it yourself? I would love to hear from you in the comments section. What do you think? Do you like the films? Are they not for you? And if you're not familiar with these films, would you be willing to check them out now you've seen this review? Once again, I would love to hear from you in that comment section below. I will say that I've noticed some of the episodes are available on YouTube at the moment. If I find them, I will leave links in the description below. Maybe it's worth checking some of them out before you go and buy the box set, but again, I would love to hear your thoughts. Anyway folks, that is all we've got time for in this episode, and until next time. I don't know who they are, but if you don't subscribe, they will get you. So make sure you are indeed subscribed, click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new video here on Monster Gab. Like the video if you did indeed like it, share this with your friends and leave that comment down there. Thank you so much for stopping by. Merry Christmas, take care, bye bye.